Pocketing the Light. Chapter 1. The Stranger at the Corner Pocket. The neon sign of the corner pocket buzzed and flickered against the rain-slick streets, casting strange shadows across my face as I pushed through the door. The familiar scent of beer, cigarette smoke, and regret welcomed me like an old friend. I'd been coming here for years now, long enough that my bar stool might as well have had my name etched into it. The usual? Alex? Manny, the aging bartender, didn't even look up from the glass he was polishing. "Make it a double," I replied, shrugging off my wet jacket. "Been that kind of day?" He nodded knowingly. In this place, it was always that kind of day for someone. I was halfway through my whiskey when I noticed him. In the 5 years I'd been frequenting this dive, I'd never seen him before. He stood by the pool table, cue in hand, studying the layout with quiet intensity. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him at first glance. Average height, simple clothes, maybe in his mid-30s, but something about his presence drew my attention. What struck me most was how out of place yet perfectly at ease he seemed. The corner pocket wasn't exactly known for its upstanding clientele. It was where people came to forget or be forgotten. Yet this stranger carried himself with a quiet confidence that seemed immune to the gritty surroundings. "Who's the new guy?" I asked Manny, nodding toward the pool table. Manny glanced over. "Showed up a couple of days ago. Interesting guy. Generous tipper too." He leaned in conspiratorially. "And a hell of a pool player." I watched as the stranger lined up a shot, 3 cushions before sinking the 8-ball perfectly. His opponent, Decker, a notoriously bad loser, slammed his cue against the wall. "That's bull," Decker's profanity-laced tirade cut through the bar. The stranger just smiled and extended his hand. "Good game." It wasn't what he said but how he said it, with genuine respect, devoid of the mockery or tension that typically accompanied victories in this place. Decker looked confused, then grudgingly shook his hand before storming off to the bar. Curiosity piqued, I drained my glass and made my way to the pool table. "Impressive shot," I said, picking up a cue. "Care for another game?" He looked at me with eyes that seemed older than his face, not tired, but wise in a way I couldn't quite place. "I'd enjoy that," he replied, racking the balls. "I'm Thomas." "Alex," I replied while rubbing chalk onto my cue, the dust tinting my fingers blue. "Fair warning, I'm not as easy to beat as Decker." Thomas smiled again, that same genuine expression. I never assume anything about anyone I meet. I won the break. Scattering balls across the green felt like my scattered thoughts across my mind. The whiskey was hitting now, bringing with it the familiar blur of half-pleasant numbness. I sank 3 solids before misjudging the angle on a routine corner pocket shot, the ball rattling in and out. Frustration washed over me. "Damn it," I muttered. "Close shot," Thomas commented, studying the table. "No judgment, no gloating." For the next hour, we played and talked. Well, mostly I talked, the alcohol loosening my tongue more than I'd typically allow with a stranger. Thomas listened, really listened, in a way few people ever had. He asked questions that somehow cut through my usual deflections and sarcasm. "So what's your story, Thomas?" I finally asked, after he'd cleared the table for the 4th consecutive time. "What brings you to a place like this?" "People," he answered simply. I laughed. "Not the ambiance or our fine selection of watered-down drinks?" "I find the real world happens in places like this," he said, leaning against his cue. "Not in boardrooms or churches." The mention of churches made me snort. Haven't set foot in one of those since my grandmother's funeral. Load of hypocrites asking forgiveness on Sunday for what they'll do again on Monday. Thomas didn't flinch at my bitterness. "Some are, certainly. Humanity is consistent in its inconsistency." That made me pause. It wasn't the defensive response I expected. "You religious then?" I asked, expecting the conversation to take the usual turn, where they either try to save my soul or get offended. "I have faith," he replied thoughtfully, "but I think religion and faith are often very different things." Before I could unpack that statement, Manny called last orders. Somehow, the entire evening had slipped by. "Same time tomorrow?" Thomas asked as we returned our cues. I hesitated. There was something about this man that unsettled me, not in a threatening way, but in how he seemed to see through the carefully constructed walls I'd built around myself. "Sure," I found myself saying anyway. I need a chance to win back some dignity." He laughed, a genuine, warm sound that seemed to brighten the dingy bar. "I look forward to it, Alex." As I walked home that night, the rain having given way to clear skies filled with stars I rarely noticed, I felt oddly lighter. Something about Thomas's presence, his way of listening without pushing, of being so completely himself without apology or explanation, had momentarily lifted the weight I'd been carrying for so long. Little did I know that some strangers don't simply pass through your life, they alter it, like a stone dropping into still water, sending ripples outward in patterns impossible to predict. And Thomas, with his easy laugh across that pool table, had just broken the surface. Chapter 2. Restoring More Than Wood. I hadn't always been the bitter regular at the corner pocket. Once, I'd had ambitions, relationships, a life that resembled something like normalcy, but a series of bad decisions, betrayals, both received and committed, and the slow erosion of hope had led me down a path of self-destruction I couldn't seem to veer from. My job at the advertising agency had become just enough to fund my drinking and pay my rent. My last meaningful relationship had ended 3 years ago when Eliza finally gave up on me after one too many broken promises. My family had given me the tough love treatment, making it clear that the door was open when I decided to get my act together. I didn't blame any of them. The person I saw in the mirror each morning, when I could bear to look, deserved every bit of the loneliness that enveloped my life. The next evening, I found myself back at the corner pocket earlier than usual. I told myself it was because I had nothing better to do, but the truth was, I was curious about Thomas. He wasn't there when I arrived, and I felt a twinge of disappointment. Had I imagined the whole interaction? It wouldn't be the first time alcohol had blurred the lines of reality for me. I was on my second drink when he appeared, as if materializing from the shadows. "Alex," he greeted me warmly. "Ready for that rematch?" I smirked, leaning against the table. "That depends. Are you planning to play left-handed to give me a chance?" Thomas smiled, chalking his cue precisely. "I could, but I think you'd prefer a fair fight." "Go on then," I said, grinning. "Let's see if you can bring the heat again tonight." We played a few games, and just like the night before, Thomas had the upper hand. I put up more of a fight this time, but he still controlled the table with effortless precision. He never gloated, just played with quiet confidence, offering the occasional friendly tip when I botched a shot. Following pool, we ended up at the dartboard. "So what do you do, Thomas?" I asked, retrieving my darts from the board, "when you're not hustling strangers in dive bars?" "I'm a carpenter," he replied, lining up his throw. "Restoration work, mostly." "Fitting," I remarked. "You seem like the type who fixes broken things." Something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps. "Everything has value," he said simply, "even things others might discard." Throughout the evening, our conversation flowed even more easily than the night before. Thomas had a way of asking questions that made me want to answer honestly, stripping away my usual layers of deflection. When the topic turned to my work, I surprised myself with my candor. "I used to love it," I admitted, "creating something from nothing, using words and images to tell a story. Now I just help corporations convince people to buy things they don't need with money they don't have." "Sounds like you've lost your direction and purpose," Thomas said, steadying his aim. He released the dart, hitting the bullseye dead center, as if to make the point. "Without focus, things tend to go astray." "Purpose?" I scoffed. "That's a luxury for people who haven't screwed up their lives beyond recognition." Thomas set down his darts and faced me fully. "Purpose isn't earned, Alex. It's discovered, often in the most unexpected places." "Is that some kind of religious philosophy?" I challenged, feeling suddenly defensive. "It's human philosophy," he countered gently. "Religious or not, people need meaning." "Well, I gave up looking for meaning at the bottom of too many bottles," I said, attempting humor to mask the truth of my words. Thomas didn't laugh. Instead, he looked at me with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see every shadow I tried to hide. "Maybe you were looking in the wrong places." For some reason, coming from him, the words didn't sound like judgment or a sermon. They sounded like an invitation. We played several more games, our conversation shifting to lighter topics. Thomas told stories of restoration projects gone wrong, clients with impossible demands, and the satisfaction of bringing forgotten beauty back to life in old furniture and buildings. He spoke with such passion about his work that I found myself envying his clarity and purpose. As the night approached closing time, a commotion erupted at the bar. Decker, clearly having drunk far too much, was shouting at Manny over his tab. "You're cheating me, you old bastard," he slurred, grabbing Manny's shirt across the bar. Before the bouncer could intervene, Thomas was there, his hand gently but firmly on Decker's shoulder. "Hey, friend," he said calmly, "let's talk about this outside." Decker whirled around, fist raised. "Mind your own damn business." The bar fell silent. I tensed, ready to jump in if needed, though what help my own inebriated state would offer was questionable. But Thomas didn't flinch or back away. He stood there, his expression compassionate rather than confrontational. "You're having a rough night, I understand, but this isn't the way." Something in his tone, his stance, or perhaps the unwavering kindness in his eyes caused Decker's aggression to deflate visibly. His fist lowered slowly. "Come on," Thomas said, now with a hand on Decker's back. "I'll walk you home." To my astonishment, Decker allowed himself to be guided toward the door. Thomas glanced back at me with a small smile. "Rain check on that last game?" I nodded, speechless. After they left, the bar gradually returned to its normal hum of conversation and clinking glasses, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. I sat back at the bar, declining Manny's offer of another drink. "Never seen anyone talk Decker down like that," Manny commented, wiping the counter. "Your friend's either crazy or some kind of saint." I stared at the door through which Thomas had disappeared. "I'm not sure he's either," I replied, "but he's definitely not like anyone I've met before." That night as I walked home, surprisingly sober compared to my usual state at this hour, I found myself contemplating Thomas's words about purpose and meaning. For the first time in years, I felt a faint stirring of something I'd long forgotten, not hope exactly, but perhaps the ghost of it. Chapter 3: Bridges Can Always Be Rebuilt. The pattern continued for weeks. Almost every evening, I would find Thomas at the corner pocket, and we would play pool or darts, talking about everything and nothing. He never pushed religion on me, though occasional references to faith peppered his conversation. Instead, he asked questions that made me think, really think, about the path my life had taken. "What did you want to be when you were young, before the world told you what you should be?" he asked one night as we sat at a corner table, the pool cue forgotten. "A writer," I admitted, the dream so long buried that speaking it aloud felt like excavating an artifact from another life. Not advertising copy or slogans. Real stories that matter. "What stopped you?" I shrugged, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Life, reality, the need to pay bills." "Those are circumstances, not reasons," Thomas replied, his eyes holding that now familiar look of gentle challenge. "Circumstances can change." "Not all of them," I countered. "Some bridges stay burned." "That's where you're wrong," he said quietly. "Bridges can always be rebuilt. Sometimes they're even stronger the second time around." Despite my skepticism, Thomas's words took root somewhere deep within me. I found myself drinking less during our conversations, wanting to remember them clearly the next day. I started carrying a small notebook again, something I hadn't done since college, jotting down thoughts and observations that might someday become stories. It wasn't just the big things, though. Thomas had a way of illuminating the small moments, finding beauty and meaning in what most would overlook. He would stop mid-sentence to point out the perfect geometry of condensation rings on the bar, or the way the evening light transformed the gritty window into stained glass. "The sacred isn't just in churches," he told me once. "It's everywhere, if you have eyes to see it." I began to notice how Thomas interacted with others in the bar, not just with me. He remembered names, details about people's lives, their struggles and joys. He listened to the bitter divorcee lamenting his ex-wife's betrayal with the same attention he gave to the young bartender excited about starting community college. He treated the wealthy businessman who occasionally slummed it at our bar with the same respect he showed the homeless man who came in just to get warm. In Thomas's eyes, everyone had equal worth, equal stories to tell. One night, about 2 months after our first meeting, Thomas didn't show up. I waited until closing, nursing a single beer that grew warm and flat as the hours passed. The bar felt emptier somehow, the conversations around me more hollow. The next night was the same, and the next. "Haven't seen your friend in a while," Manny commented on the fourth night, sliding me a club soda I hadn't ordered. "Thought you might want a break from the hard stuff." I nodded gratefully, realizing I hadn't actually wanted alcohol. I'd just been following a well-worn pattern. Did he say anything to you? I asked. About leaving? Manny shook his head. People come and go in this business. You know that better than most. I did know. The corner pocket had seen countless faces pass through its doors over the years, some becoming regulars, others just blips in the continuum of the bar's existence. Why should Thomas be any different? But he was different, and his absence left a void that alcohol couldn't fill. Chapter 4. The Reawakening Spark. A week passed, then two. I continued coming to the bar, but more out of habit than desire. I played pool occasionally with other regulars, but the games lacked the depth and meaning they'd held with Thomas. It was during the third week without him that I made a decision. After leaving the bar early, I found myself walking not toward my apartment but in the direction of the small, struggling community newspaper office I passed every day on my way to work. The Help Wanted sign had been in their window for weeks. I'd registered it peripherally but never given it serious thought. Now, staring at the dim light still burning inside despite the late hour, I felt a pull I couldn't ignore. I didn't expect anyone to be there, but I tried the door anyway. It opened. A harried-looking woman glanced up from behind a cluttered desk. "We're closed," she said automatically, then seemed to reconsider. "Unless you're here about a story. Are you here about a story?" "Sort of," I replied, stepping inside. "I'm here about the job. The one in the window." She studied me critically. "You have journalism experience?" "Advertising," I admitted. "But before that, I studied creative writing. I've been looking for something with more meaning." She laughed, a short, tired sound. "Well, we can't offer much money, but meaning we've got in spades." She extended her hand. "I'm Joan, editor, owner, and currently the entire staff of the Neighborhood Voice." "Alex," I replied, shaking her hand. "I'm not looking for much money, just a change." That conversation led to a part-time position writing local interest stories. I kept my advertising job for the steady income but negotiated reduced hours. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of the passion that had once driven me, finding stories that mattered, giving voice to people and issues overlooked by the larger papers. I still went to the corner pocket occasionally, partly from habit and partly hoping Thomas might return, but the desperate need to drown my sorrows had diminished. I found myself engaging with the other regulars in ways I never had before, really listening to their stories the way Thomas had listened to mine. One afternoon, as I was interviewing a longtime resident about the history of the neighborhood for an article, the elderly man mentioned a restoration project happening at the old community center. "Beautiful craftsmanship," he said admiringly. "The fellow doing the work, he's not just replacing the damaged parts, he's bringing out the original beauty. Makes you see the whole building differently." A flutter of recognition stirred within me. "This carpenter?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "What's his name?" The man thought for a moment. "Thomas, I believe. Quiet fellow. Always has time to explain what he's doing to the kids who stop by to watch." My heart raced as I thanked the man and, after finishing the interview, made my way across town to the community center. It was late afternoon by the time I arrived, the sun casting long shadows across the partially restored facade. Scaffolding hugged one side of the building, but I saw no one working. I was about to leave when I caught a glimpse of movement inside. Following my instinct, I entered through the unlocked front door. The interior was a work in progress, plastic sheeting protecting areas, the scent of sawdust and varnish hanging in the air. I followed the sound of gentle hammering to a side room where the ornate wooden ceiling was being painstakingly restored. And there he was, balanced on a scaffold, carefully fitting a piece of carved wood into place. In the golden afternoon light filtering through the windows, dust motes dancing around him, Thomas looked almost luminous. "You're a hard man to find," I called up to him. He turned, and the smile that spread across his face held genuine delight. "Alex, I was wondering if our paths would cross again." He descended the scaffold with practiced ease, wiping his hands on a cloth tucked into his belt. Up close, he looked the same as ever, that sense of peace still radiating from him. "You disappeared," I said, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. "I go where I'm needed," he replied simply. "The work here was unexpected but necessary." We stood in silence for a moment, the air between us charged with unspoken words. "You look well," he finally said. "Something's different." "Everything's different," I admitted. "I've been making changes. Writing again. Real writing." His smile deepened, reaching his eyes. I'm glad to hear that. It's because of you, I blurted out. The things you said, the way you see the world, it changed something in me. Thomas shook his head gently. I just reminded you of what was already there, Alex. The change came from within you. But you guided me toward it, I insisted. You saw value in me when I couldn't see it in myself. That's what friends do, he said simply. They help us see our true selves more clearly. We talked until the light began to fade, me sharing my new beginnings at the paper, him explaining the intricacies of the restoration work. There was an ease between us that transcended our time apart, as if the connection we'd formed couldn't be severed by mere absence. As we prepared to leave, I finally asked the question that had been burning inside me. Who are you really, Thomas? Sometimes I feel like, I hesitated, feeling foolish. Like what? He prompted gently. Like you came into my life for a reason. Like you saw something in me that needed, I don't know, restoration. He considered this, his eyes thoughtful. Perhaps we're all works in progress, Alex. Perhaps we all need restoration from time to time. Will I see you again? I asked as we exited the community center, the evening sky by now fading to midnight blue, city lights flickering to life around us. I expect our paths will cross again, he replied with that enigmatic smile. Life has a way of bringing together those who are meant to meet. As I watched him walk away, something Manny had said the night I first met Thomas echoed in my mind, your friend's either crazy or some kind of saint. I still didn't know which, if either, was true. But I knew with absolute certainty that meeting Thomas had set me on a path toward redemption, not the religious kind that required confession and absolution, but the deeply human kind that came from recognizing my own worth and the meaning my life could hold. Chapter 5, The Light of Life. In the months that followed, my life continued to transform in ways I never could have imagined. The part-time position at the Neighborhood Voice gradually became full-time as my articles gained traction with readers and advertisers alike. I found myself writing stories that mattered, about community activism, local heroes, and the everyday struggles and triumphs of people whose voices rarely made the news. I saw Thomas occasionally, sometimes at the community center where his restoration work continued, sometimes unexpectedly in places around the neighborhood. Each encounter felt like a gift, a chance to share my progress and gain new insights from his quiet wisdom. You found your purpose, he observed one day as we sat on a bench in the park, watching children play on equipment he had helped restore. I think I'm finding it, I corrected. It feels like a journey rather than a destination. He nodded approvingly. The best journeys don't end. They just reveal new landscapes. As spring turned to summer, I found myself drawn back to the corner pocket, not out of habit or need, but with purpose. Manny greeted me with surprise the first night I returned without ordering a drink, notebook in hand instead of a glass. Doing a story on dive bars? He asked skeptically. On community, I replied, and this place, believe it or not, is exactly that. Over the next few weeks, I interviewed the regulars, people I'd sat beside for years without really knowing. Their stories were profound in their ordinariness. Decker, the angry pool player, was a widower raising 2 teenagers alone. The quiet woman who always sat in the corner was a retired teacher who had educated generations of neighborhood children. The boisterous group that came in on Thursdays were volunteer firefighters unwinding after training. The article, when published, transformed how the neighborhood viewed the corner pocket. It was no longer just the seedy bar on the corner but a vital hub where lives intersected. Business increased, and Manny even hired extra help to keep up. You did good, kid, he told me one evening when I stopped by, though I'm still getting used to seeing you sober. I laughed. Makes 2 of us. As I was absorbing the familiar atmosphere, I spotted a welcome face at the pool table. Thomas was teaching a young man, one of Decker's sons, I realized, how to line up a difficult shot. The trick is to see beyond what's obvious, I overheard him saying. Sometimes the direct path isn't possible, so you have to find another way to your goal. Later, as we shared a quiet corner table, Thomas commented on my article. You've given this place new life, he said. You've helped people see it differently. I learned from the best, I replied. You changed how I saw everything, including myself. That's what matters most, he said thoughtfully. How we see ourselves determines how we move through the world. I studied him in the dim light, this man who had appeared so mysteriously in my life and catalyzed such profound change. Thomas, I began hesitantly, I've never asked because I didn't want to put you in a box, but your faith, it shapes you, doesn't it? He considered the question carefully. Faith isn't just what we believe. It's how we live those beliefs. Many people claim faith but don't allow it to transform them. Like those Sunday Christians I criticized when we first met, I acknowledged. Faith without action is just philosophy, he continued. Real faith changes how we treat others, how we view the world, how we understand our place in it. I think I'm beginning to understand that, I admitted. Not religion, necessarily, but something deeper. A connection to something larger than myself. Thomas smiled. That's where it all begins. As the summer waned, I saw Thomas less frequently. The community center project was complete, and he mentioned new work taking him to other parts of the city. Each time we parted, I half expected it to be the last time I'd see him, but he would always reappear when I least expected it, at a community garden I was writing about, chatting with a street musician, or sitting quietly in the back row of a town hall meeting. It was at one such meeting, where the local library was threatened with closure due to funding cuts, that I realized how much I had changed. Standing up to speak, I passionately argued for the vital role the library played in bringing people together. I emphasized how books educate, broaden minds, and provide people with the tools to improve their lives, whether it's learning new skills, gaining knowledge, or simply escaping into different worlds. As I spoke, I barely recognized the person I had once been, the bitter, cynical person who cared only about the next drink, now standing up for something far more important than my old, self-destructive ways. After the meeting, as people gathered in small groups to continue the discussion, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Thomas stood beside me, pride evident in his expression. "You found your voice," he said simply. "I never thought I'd care this much," I confessed. "About a neighborhood, about people I barely knew a year ago." "That's what happens when you begin to see the divine in the everyday," he replied. "You recognize the sacred in all things." We stepped out together in comfortable silence, the autumn evening wrapping around us like a gentle embrace. At the corner where our paths would diverge, I turned to him. "I never thanked you properly," I said, "for what you did for me." "You never needed to," he answered. "Seeing you become who you were meant to be is thanks enough." "Will I see you at the corner pocket soon?" I asked, already sensing the answer. He smiled that enigmatic smile that had intrigued me from the first moment we met. "My work here is nearly complete, but our paths will cross again, Alex. I'm certain of it." As he walked away, silhouetted against the setting sun, I felt not sadness but profound gratitude. Whatever Thomas was, carpenter, philosopher, or something I couldn't quite name, he had helped me rebuild my life from the ruins of what it had become. Chapter 6. A Work of Heart. In the following weeks, as expected, Thomas disappeared from the neighborhood. The community center stood restored, its beauty enhanced rather than altered by his work. The corner pocket continued its quiet transformation, remaining true to its roots while becoming something more. And I continued writing, telling stories that mattered, building bridges between diverse parts of the community, finding meaning in the everyday miracles happening all around us. Sometimes, late at night as I walked home from the neighborhood voice office or from speaking with a source for a story, I would pass the corner pocket and remember the night I first met Thomas. The neon sign still buzzed and flickered, but it no longer represented escape or oblivion to me. Instead, it marked the spot where my resurrection began. I never knew if Thomas was, as Manny had suggested, crazy or a saint. Perhaps he was neither, or perhaps a bit of both. What I did know was that in his quiet way, without judgment or preaching, he had embodied the core teachings I had rejected along with organized religion. Compassion, seeing the worth in every person, finding the sacred in the ordinary, and the power of love to transform even the most broken spirit. As I continued my own journey of restoration, I found myself paying forward what Thomas had given me, really seeing people, listening to their stories, recognizing their inherent worth, and in doing so, I discovered that perhaps the most profound spiritual truth is also the simplest. We find our salvation not in escaping the world but in engaging with it fully, with open hearts and clear eyes. The mystery of Thomas remained, but my own transformation no longer puzzled me. It wasn't religion that saved me, or faith as the preachers defined it. It was connection, raw and messy and terrifying. To others, to community, to purpose, to that dangerous thing we call meaning. And in that connection, I found something I never deserved but desperately needed: redemption. The kind that doesn't wash you clean, but lets you live with the stains. Remember this. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. 2 Corinthians 9:6. The Invisible Game. The Parable of Old Solomon. At the edge of town stood the final frame, a pool hall as old as the railroad tracks that had once brought prosperity and now brought only freight and memories. Its windows were perpetually fogged, less from condensation than from decades of stories exhaled into the air by those with nowhere else to go. Among its fixtures was an elderly man called Solomon. No one knew when he had first appeared or where he had come from. He owned no car, rented no room that anyone knew of, yet each evening he would be there, seated at the corner table beneath the flickering beer sign, watching the games unfold in silence. What made Solomon peculiar was not his quietness, nor the threadbare suit he never seemed to change, but his habit of playing pool alone on the most damaged table, the one management kept meaning to replace, with its torn felt and subtle slant that made it useless for serious players. Most peculiar of all, Solomon played without balls. His ritual never varied. He would carefully chalk his cue, lean over the empty table, and make precise shooting motions, pausing between each as if tracking invisible trajectories across the green expanse. Sometimes he would nod with satisfaction. Other times he would frown and adjust his stance for another attempt. The old man's cracked, most patrons concluded, tapping their temples when Solomon was mentioned. The bartender allowed him to stay out of a mixture of pity and superstition. "He brings a certain balance to the place," he would say when questioned. One evening, a once famous player named Delia arrived, her reputation preceding her, a champion whose career had ended in scandal and disgrace. Now she hustled small town halls, taking money from men who couldn't believe a woman could play as she did. After clearing the tables of all challengers, Delia noticed Solomon in his corner, making his strange, silent shots. "What's his story?" she asked the bartender. "Solomon? He's playing the ghost game." "The what?" "That's what he calls it. Says he's playing against all the mistakes he's ever made." Curiosity piqued, Delia approached Solomon's table. "Mind if I watch your technique?" Solomon glanced up, his eyes surprisingly clear and penetrating. "You don't believe there's a game happening here?" It wasn't a question, so Delia didn't answer. "Most don't," he continued, straightening up. "They need to see balls clacking together to believe in impact." "And you don't?" "I've learned that the most important collisions in life are invisible to the eye." He offered her his cue. "Would you like to try?" Something in his manner, neither challenging nor condescending, made refusal impossible. Delia took the cue and leaned over the empty table. "What am I aiming at?" "The regret that keeps you running from city to city. Third diamond from the left." Delia's hand trembled slightly. She had told no one in this town about her past. "That's not possible to hit," she said. "Only if you believe the object must be destroyed to be overcome." Solomon's voice remained gentle. "Sometimes acknowledgement is enough." Whether from exhaustion, curiosity, or something deeper, Delia made the shot, striking at nothing. Yet as her cue sliced through the empty air above the faded felt, a profound sense of release washed through her, as if something long carried had finally been set down. In the weeks that followed, Delia became a regular at Solomon's table, learning his curious game. Others began to join, tentatively at first, then with growing conviction. The damaged table became the most sought after in the hall. They played shots at their broken promises, missed opportunities, and festering resentments. No one could explain why the ritual brought such peace, yet no one could deny its effect. One morning, Solomon was simply gone. The regulars waited, but days passed with no sign of him. Eventually, the bartender placed a small brass plaque on his table that read, "Some see what isn't there, others don't see what is. Wisdom lies in knowing the difference." Years later, when newcomers asked about the old table, still there, still without balls, and yet still played on as originally taught by Solomon, the answers varied depending on who they asked. "Just an old tradition started by a homeless man with dementia," some would say. "A form of meditation invented by a spiritual master," others insisted. But Delia, who had stayed in town and eventually bought the final frame, would only smile and say, "There are two types of players in this world. Those who need to pocket something to feel accomplished, and those who understand that sometimes the most important game is the one no one else can see you playing." A final word. Stories, like seeds, are planted in darkness. We never truly know which ones will take root, which will struggle to break through hardened soil, or which might lie dormant for seasons before finally pushing toward light. This book began as my own reckoning with questions that have no easy answers. Questions about connection and isolation, about redemption and the stains we carry, about faith that begins not in certainty but in doubt. If Alex's story and mine have planted anything in you, a question, a discomfort, a longing, I hope you'll give it the space to grow, however slowly, in whatever direction it needs. The journey from seed to fruit is rarely straight, and never without struggle. But there is something sacred in the struggle itself. And perhaps that's where faith begins. Alex Holy Higgins.